This is Hans van die Bovenkamp, and I'm going to take you for a 10-minute guided tour through the property. On the left are horse stables, which is operated by C3. And there are the horses. They are therapeutic horses, so they're wonderful for children that have handicap issues. And now we're going to approach the beginning of the sculpture garden, and we have to pass through this gate. And this gate opens automatically and is driven by a air pump, hydraulic air pump, so it can manage the weight, because this is heavy stainless steel. There are sculptures which are sited throughout the property. For example, to the right was a portal. I've done quite a few portals. Here is a pond that I put in with a lining, a rubber lining. I love to have water around for reflection. It shows the weather right away, if it's sunny or raining. And here is a sculpture called the Red Trunk. All my work is either stainless steel or bronze. This is stainless steel, and then we had it painted. Here is a sculpture, a very old, much older piece called Circles and Waves, and this is hand painted. And this idea really came about when you drop a stone in the water, you get concentric circles, and the cross section is a wave. A lot of my work is curved in order to allow the moving sun to give different light on the sculpture as the sun travels. Here's another view of the pond. There's enough space between sculptures so each one feels somewhat isolated by itself and they're not piled on top of each other. This is one of my very successful pieces. This is called the Sag Portal. I have these in various sizes, and these are basically shapes, and they were inspired by Stonehenge. And the word for these shapes is called menhir. This sculpture is titled Ode to Mandela. This particular piece is in bronze and it's much darker. That piece, of course, is stainless steel, and that is titled We the People. Here's another variation on the same kind of sculpture, again in stainless steel, and by the surface treatment that is done with a body grinder, and we make a kind of a calligraphic surface, which you cannot do in this particular piece because that is bronze and that is much more reductive. Well, stainless steel is much more reflective. And this is the place where I rest at the end of the day. Here is another gate, basically are sweeping brush strokes, and that is not installed yet because the mechanism is quite costly to move these heavy shapes around. And there's a little Buddha house for the birds. And here is a sculpture, and that is titled Lady Grace. It's about 12, 13 feet tall. Here is one studio where we make smaller pieces. Kevin Miller is my assistant and fabricator for the past 20 years. These are shapes that I make in cardboard, and then the studio converts it into metal, and then we bend it up together and create voluminous shapes. These are six-sided shapes. As you can see, this is tacked together, and if we like it, then we weld it, and then we have to clean the weld. The portal on the left is titled Black Portal, with one shape on top that is unpainted. This particular sculpture is titled Itzamna Stella. That was a landmark in honor of a nature god. That building in the distance is my studio, and my friend John Jinks is walking around it. He's the filmmaker of this wonderful 10-minute documentary. That piece to your right is called Stella in the Wind. So it was a big vertical column, but then the wind came and blew it horizontally. And here to the right is a sculpture called Ode to Miles, Miles Davis, who was one of my collectors. I've had very interesting people collect my work. I'm always very honored. That piece in the center in front of the little barn is called Her Majesty, and that's a bronze sculpture. Each sculpture has a connection either to nature or to mythology. Mythology stories are fascinating, and anything is possible, so that is good for the creative process. The sculpture on the left is titled Izanami and Izanaki. These are two mythological gods that created Japan. The next sculpture is titled Green Thunder. The large sculpture in front of the studio is titled Manhattan Portal and is fabricated out of bronze. And here is another portal in stainless steel, which is much stronger. It's very good for public places because it can be seen from a distance, and at night with the moonlight on it, you can see it. Here is another gate that is painted red. So I've made some gates and I've made portals. These two pieces are by my wife, who sadly passed away, and these are two gloves, and there's a whole poem that goes with it. And I have friends who sit on that little bench and then meditate in front of the gloves, which is interesting. Then Siv Siedering, my wife who passed away, she made these blue sculptures. This was a sculpture about a relationship that ended and the table broke apart and the fruit fell out of the basket. This is one of the pieces by Siv, the two shoes, and that again has a whole poem with it. And usually the poem is carved in stone. This is one of my sculptures, a blue one called a palette. Here is another palette. And that's the painter's palette, except I made it very three-dimensional, so it's kind of the sculptor's painter palette. This is another gate that is just on display, it is not operating. And now we're going for a little walk through the studio, where I keep my smaller indoor pieces, which are most of the time maquettes for the larger pieces, and we can study the structure and the, the strength and how it holds up. I also paint in the studio when painting is a little easier than schlepping metal. It gets to be very heavy. As you can see, some paintings, and my paintings deal mostly with the texture I have seen from sunlight on my sculpture, the surface. There is one sculpture that was painted in different colors, and I have a little place to sit and wait for the inspiration to arrive. There are drawings that are acrylic drawings, spontaneously painted. No, I don't really pre-draw. And you can see little models everywhere. This large sculpture in bronze is titled Sweet Denise, inspired by Denise Moore, my partner for 10 years. And this is the studio, and it's wonderful to have these glass garage doors that can open up and let air and sunlight in. Thank you, and all the credit goes to my dear friend John Jinks.